Hello and welcome to IG's Trading the Markets podcast. Well, the pollsters were wrong. The blue wave that was anticipated with a Biden sweeping victory has failed to materialise, and we're currently in a nail-biting tiebreaker that's too close to call. So what does this mean for markets? Justin McQueen joins me to discuss from DailyFX. Now, just to be clear before we start, we're recording this at 11:30 a.m. UK time on Wednesday, so there's still a long way to go. Justin, good to chat to you. I know you've been up all night, so you're probably flagging a bit by now. What were you expecting yesterday, and how does the reality compare?
In terms of the price action that we did see yesterday, we did see this sort of blue wave trade somewhat prematurely with yesterday's price action prior to the US election results started to come in. A wave of dollar selling, equity starting to get a bit of support as well. And then pretty much as the night unfolded, we started to see a bit of a reminiscent to 2016 on the back of Florida going in the way of favor of Donald Trump. And then pretty early on, we started to see a bit of this reverse of the blue wave trade that, like you rightly mentioned, that pollsters had been pretty much predicting. And so therefore, we started to see a bit more support for the US dollar against its counterparts and a bit of a pullback in terms of equity markets. And then as the night continued to unfold, we started to see certain states moving in favor of Biden, such as Arizona, which had been one of the key battlegrounds to look out for. And so then pretty much we started to move away from potentially a 2016 scenario to more of a contested election scenario, which we do find ourselves currently. And I suppose in terms of the betting markets currently, it has now flipped in favor of Joe Biden. Joe Biden had been a bit of an outsider until the European morning, in which we saw Wisconsin start to show a bit of a lead for Joe Biden. And since then, we've started to see more support in the way of Joe Biden as we move where we are currently as things play out.
So is that sort of your hunch that Biden's going to beat Trump at the last minute? I know that the kind of key states to look out for appear to be Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. What are you expecting?
Yeah, I think in terms of the states and how things are pretty much played out at the moment, there's more ways that Joe Biden can get in to White House as opposed to Donald Trump managing to be re-elected. So at the moment, Nevada, which has been showing some support for Joe Biden as well. If we see the likes of Wisconsin follow in Michigan, then potentially we could actually see Joe Biden not necessarily need Pennsylvania in order to secure the keys to the White House. So in terms of mathematically, it's a bit more difficult for Donald Trump. There's more states that he actually needs in order to secure re-election. And hence why we're starting to see a bit of the money sort of flow in for Joe Biden on the bookmakers anyway, as opposed to Donald Trump. But again, like you say, those key states will be what is vital, pretty much in terms of what will dictate market sentiment, because as things stand, given that it is pretty much unclear, it's still pretty choppy trading conditions. There's no real sort of clear direction, given the fact that the outcome does remain pretty much unclear. And I suppose in terms of how long this could last, well, Wisconsin is starting to say that we could see something in the early hours of Thursday morning. Pennsylvania potentially continuing to count their votes until Friday, and similarly with Michigan potentially taking a couple of days. So again, it's still all to play for. It's still more time for some twists and turns. So while the odds are moving out of favor of Donald Trump, it's still wise not to completely rule him out.
If you can keep your head.
When all about you are losing theirs,
what possibilities might you see?
If you can see it, the world is yours to trade and invest. See it, IG it.
So aside from who will win the presidency, there's also an interesting question around the Senate, which looks quite close, because that's pretty critical for the ease at which a president can actually enact policy once in. What are your expectations there?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to the sort of pollsters sort of predicting a sort of a comfortable Biden victory has been somewhat anything but a comfortable victory. And again, it's still all to play for with the Senate as well, but it does seem a bit more likely that the Republican will maintain the Senate. And if that is the case, then really that does a lot of the focus with fiscal stimulus. That does provide some shackles as to how much fiscal stimulus that not only the markets may have been anticipating with a blue wave, but again, also in terms of how much Joe Biden could actually do in the way of fiscal stimulus, because I'm pretty sure that if Republicans were to retain the Senate, then essentially they'd probably turn back to becoming fiscal hawks and ultimately preventing a lot of the policies that Joe Biden may want to accomplish that will be put on hold until at least 2 years, until the next midterm. So again, that is of course something that's very much in focus as well. It's not just the presidents, of course, right? Like you say, the Senate as well, and that ultimately does dictate, a lot of the focus in terms of how much fiscal stimulus we could be expecting in the forthcoming months.
Yeah, because there's been so much talk about the COVID relief bill in the run up to the election that Trump ultimately postponed until after the votes. What you're saying about the Senate and the fact that it's more likely to go to the Republicans, what does that mean in terms of the fiscal package that we might expect?
I think one thing in terms of fiscal stimulus for a COVID relief bill, I do believe there will still be bipartisan support for a COVID relief bill. I just don't think it's going to be within the region that markets may have been expecting on a blue wave. So potentially expectations could have been around for about 2 to 2.5 trillion. The figure could perhaps be somewhat below 2 trillion in terms of fiscal stimulus going forward. So that's probably, I'd say, something to keep in mind, particularly if we see Republican maintain the Senate. There's definitely going to be a bit of a dampener. And I think one thing as well, in terms of the bond market, in terms of higher yields of what we've been seeing in recent weeks, we would expect to see a bit of an unwind of that, which we have seen throughout the night. US 10 years, last time checked, they're off by about 10 basis points from the highs. So again, just a bit of an unwind of some of that blue wave trade that we've been seeing in recent weeks.
In terms of the US dollar, we've been seeing a little bit of strength coming through, and US futures appear to look mixed. We know it was a strong day on Wall Street in the run up to the election. What should we expect in terms of trade across the rest of the week? Because we know that the thing that markets like least is uncertainty, and that appears to be exactly what they've got.
Yeah, I think in terms of the US dollar, I think really the first thing is, like you say, just how uncertain the election outcome is. And ultimately, until we emerge to have a clear winner, the dollar is likely to maintain a bit of support until a clear winner does emerge, in which case then we can start to see a wave of dollar selling, a bit more firmness in the likes of the euro, the pound, and its other major counterparts. So again, until that point, we're expecting to see FX markets trading in relatively choppy conditions until which we can start to see some more directional trades once a winner does emerge. Because like you say, markets ultimately don't like uncertainty, and given that's pretty much what we have, the dollar has found a bit of a firmer footing, but must keep in mind that it has come off the highs as Joe Biden's becoming increasingly likely at the moment to become the next president.
I wanted to ask you, just looking ahead more to next year, there's this theory called the presidential election cycle theory, which is essentially about how US stock markets are the weakest in the year after the election of a new president. What might we expect next year? Obviously, it depends on who's elected, but how can this theory sort of tie in with what you're expecting for 2021?
I think in terms of what we've seen historically, of course, this is currently at a time where we do have a global pandemic. So like we've seen in the likes of Europe and now the UK with renewed sort of lockdown risks, that's previously hampered risk sentiment. So of course, if we see another wave in the US, then of course that can sort of play in the sort of the historical sort of theme we've seen in terms of equity markets and how it's generally performed a year following on from the election. So there are external risks outside of the US election at play. But one thing I would say is the fact that even running up to the election, we've seen the likes of the VIX notably elevated for obvious reasons, but also the VIX curve going down the line. And so if we do start to see a bit of a clear winner, perhaps relatively soon, then potentially what we could have from that is actually traders starting to sell the VIX, which should give a bit of a boost to equity markets and potentially a bit of a slingshot higher for equity markets going into the new year. So that's definitely something I would keep my eyes out for in terms of risk sentiment in general. But of course, again, like I said, in terms of the external factors, and going back to the theme of terms of reduction of fiscal stimulus under a divided Congress as opposed to a blue wave, that will of course play its part in terms of the Federal Reserve, who have been pretty much crying out for further fiscal stimulus, which therefore then they can put into their economic projections, and also that will help them gauge how they conduct monetary policy going forward. So this will definitely be something of interest for the Federal Reserve, who's also scheduled with their monetary policy decision later on today.
All right, Justin, it was great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And that was Justin McQueen, my guest from DailyFX, talking us through what we know so far and what's likely to come from the US presidential election, which we'll be monitoring closely all week, of course. Thank you so much for listening to this latest podcast of our series, IG's Trading the Markets podcast. I'm Victoria Scholar, and if you did enjoy it, make sure to subscribe.
For more videos like these, subscribe to our YouTube channel, IG UK, and make sure to follow us on Twitter. We're at IGTV.